programs to have debt standstills, which of course have the benefit of creating fiscal space so countries can address the emergency. But I think, we are now towards the end of that process and need to instead be thinking about what the medium-term financing needs countries have at this juncture are. Again, I think the key ingredients for addressing the financing needs countries have, which really are very tremendous, are going to be twofold. First and foremost, there has to be a much greater effort on domestic revenue mobilization than was the case in the pre-crisis period. Development needs have not attenuated any. If anything, they've increased in the post-COVID environment, and no amount of external borrowing is going to help fill the gap. So there has to be a much greater domestic revenue mobilization effort. But this, importantly, has to also be complemented with significantly scaled up concessional financing by the international community. I cannot underscore this point more, how important this is going to be to allow countries to enjoy a strong recovery, much less one that's going to address a lot of the development agenda countries have in terms of greening the economy, fostering a better digital environment. This will all take financing, and the international community is going to have to play a much greater role by way of providing official development assistance, lots of concessional loans. That has been the case over the last 10, 15 years, including international financial institutions like the IMF, of course. Again, I want to stress here, though, that the solution to our countries adopting the transformative reform agenda that they need is not just about financing, but really as much domestic reforms. In addition to domestic revenue mobilization, it will be imperative to find labor-intensive growth models, which, of course, Minister Arkaba touched on earlier. The industrialization agenda, promoting agriculture, are all going to have to be a big part of how we get people out of poverty in our countries. Last but not least, also, I want to underscore the importance of governance reforms and better public finance management. Again, there's going to be a premium on ensuring that the limited resources countries have are used as efficiently and effectively as possible. Now, I want to finish by making my third point, which is, why does this all matter? Why Africa needs to be, a particular focus on Africa is needed. I think Minister Arkaba touched on it earlier, and this group knows very well, but I cannot emphasize enough how the demographic transition that's underway in the region is going to be shaping global social and development outcomes and economic outcomes in the coming years. The more we invest now, the more we are going to have a chance to influence the trajectory and the quality of the demographic dividend that Africa will be, and the rest of the world will be able to enjoy. In 10 years, in the early 2030s, half of the increase in the global labor force, will come from sub-Saharan Africa, and about 60% from Africa as a whole. Okay, so we are going to be in a situation where 1 in 2 new entrants into the labor market in 10 years are going to be African, and this at the same time where the rest of the world population is aging drastically. What we know, of course, historically, is how important labor and capital have been in facilitating the global surge in growth that we've seen over the last 200-300 years. And given how much globally we are going to be relying on African labor going forward, in making sure and investing and ensuring that the human capital investment that needs to take place, avoid the adoption of browner technologies in the terms of energy generation that Africa is going to be doing, the urbanization that needs to take place, making sure that it's an organized one. I think I cannot think of a better strategic investment for the international community than addressing those challenges. So I don't want to belabor the point too much, and we'll stop here. Thank you so much, Monsieur le Ministre. Je ne vous entends pas.
Voilà. Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais remercier M. Abibé pour ce...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for shedding light on this point.
Dans le périmètre du consensus de Dakar.
We're talking about the Dakar consensus perimeter.
We're
talking about a low yield.
Et ce coût du capital a...
The capital cost is very high, and this leads also to the perception of the risk.
Crée une situation qui déstabilise.
This creates a situation that destabilizes things. Talking about internal profitability. I'd like to ask the other speakers to stick to the allotted time, 4 minutes. I'd like to give the floor now to Ms. Kunene. You know that private creditors make up a significant part of the African debt, 39%.
Alors, quels sont, selon vous,
So,
à utiliser pour permettre cette flexibilité
what can be done in order to improve flexibility as regards the renegotiation of the African debt? You have the floor, madam.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this premier African event. It is always a pleasure for the banks to address the community at large, including those who are governing the environments where we work. So in terms of the promise of private funding for economic growth in Africa, historically, as Mr. Abebe has said, we saw in the early 2000s that the participation of private funders made sure that the preparation in each of the countries and the benchmarking exercise for our corporates against sovereigns and the discipline in terms of fiscal expenditure and budget management meant that there is a new opportunity that was given to African economies. We do acknowledge that we've come across a lingering dissatisfaction with the rating agency's view of our economies, and it has been muted in some conversations that there's a potential for a BRICS rating agency. For African banks, Chair, I would just like to highlight a few issues. Firstly, the opportunity for participation in infrastructure funding in our economies at a price which is acceptable to buyers of our services. As Abebe has said, that is in commercial terms. That was really attractive because it meant that through competition, we are able to learn from each other. And we've had to develop a lot of expertise and tools for our engagement. So we are now here, maybe almost 20 years later, where we are talking about tools for engaging private creditors in debt standstill resolutions. What is important for us, I would state, firstly, is transparency and the need to acknowledge that African banks have historically not been a part of such debt resolution standstills. Therefore, we do have a concern which we think is legitimate in terms of the ability of our balance sheets to absorb more debt in this way. While we acknowledge that the G20 initiative has been a great step in giving us a first answer, we believe that we should be talking now of a need for differentiation between the African banks and the rest of the creditors. In this regard, Chair, I would like to highlight the role of the African Development Bank, if it could be given sufficient space at the table to be the voice of African negotiation, because it is an institution that would know African institutions better. I want to highlight also the role of gross private savings in the African context. We do want to say that it is important for everyone who is helping African institutions to look at the question of domestic resource mobilization. The quoted statistics on tax collection in Africa, I will not restate it, save to emphasize that it is also important to look at fairness in terms of the trade negotiations that we have, in terms of enabling African governments to collect taxes that are due to economic activities that happen in African soil. I also would like to comment on the silver lining that's been given to us in terms of digital journeys by COVID 19. What we have seen, Chair, is a very fast pace in the space of payment platforms, whether you are talking of consumer to consumer, business to business, but also importantly for government to consumers. If I can make an example of what has happened in South Africa, the banks have been pivotal in the development of simple yet effective minimum cost solutions for distribution of funding, whether it is in the form of grants or in the form of loans that have supported what government wants to do. On the longer term credit solution for SMEs, Chair, I think we still have an issue because the credit models that we work with, whether you are even including the behavioral scorecards and the scoring that we work with, we haven't had a lot of success when it comes to better targeting of youth and women-owned businesses. So, to be short, Chair, I think what we need support on is de-risking instruments and also making sure that these youth-owned and women-owned businesses are integrated into the value chains and in the ecosystems of companies and businesses that are at the economic centers that we have in Africa. And I would like us to maybe ponder on the role of economic regulation, because we have seen how that has been a point of growth and a point of support for other economies in the world. If we could see how that could be used in the African continent to further the aims of supporting our SMEs. And I will take questions, Chair. Let me end here so that I spend my allocated time meaningfully. Thank you.
Merci, Madame, pour cet éclairage.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor now to Jana Thiam, who is the Special Envoy from the African Union, who's going through an incredibly hefty workload. So,
Les marchés financiers représentent
the financial markets
financer la croissance.
represent important sources to fund growth. How could you improve access to financial markets from the standpoint of African countries, especially when you think about the fact that in some countries of the world you have zero or negative rates, whereas in Africa these rates seem to be ever increasing? So, as the special envoy from the African Union, how or what kind of solutions could you come up with which would enable African players to have access to these markets? Well, thank you for your warm welcome here, and I'd like to apologize as well because I'm going to have to leave the meeting, unfortunately, in 10 minutes, because I've got a back-to-back meeting with investors from New York, and I really can't make them wait. I'm very, very sorry about that. I wanted to thank Macky Sall for having organised this platform, as well as the OECD and the African Union. And if you will allow me, I'll move into English now, because I think that there are a majority of players who are English speakers.
Say hello to my dear friends on the panel, Rémi, you, Adobe, and Jean-Hervé, and